Welcome to the Trent England Show. Thanks for watching this Tuesday as the legislature is hustling, trying to leave town by the end of next week. We have got all kinds of things going on this week. I want to tell you a little bit more about our guest for tomorrow's show as we get to the end of today's show. He was actually in the news the other day. You may have already read about him, and he's going to be with us tomorrow. I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but I want to ask the question, does good policy even matter? And I'll explain why I wanted to raise this question and answer it today, because we're getting into political season, right? We're getting into campaigns. There was a big Republican gubernatorial forum last night hosted by the Oklahoman, and anytime you get into political campaigns, and even during the legislative session, you have some people out there saying, well, look, don't quibble with me over details. I had somebody emailing me even just yesterday saying, well, every tax has some volatility, so it just doesn't really matter. We just need government to get as much money as they can right now, and we'll worry about the details later. And I want to explain why that is just so dead wrong for conservatives in particular. And this is where conservatives get snookered, because we fall for bad policy. We forget our principles when we compromise. Compromising is just fine if you compromise with your principles in mind. If you don't really have principles, if you don't have your principles in mind, compromising is very dangerous. But people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and John Adams and George Washington were able to compromise effectively much of the time because they knew their principles, and they kept their principles in sight even as they worked in practical politics, and they thought about what is good policy. Okay. Let's start, however, with one little piece of news. I did want to mention this because we talked about this on the program from time to time. We're doing it old school style, right? I've just got the headline here. The group that was pushing the gross production tax increase, taking the gross production tax plus 5%. Of course, the way the legislature increased the gross production tax probably would have meant that it wasn't 5 plus 5. It would have gone back to 2 and then gone up to anyhow. Right? It gets messy, but they've dropped their petition. They are no longer pushing the plus 5 gross production tax increase, basically because, if you read between the lines and what they said, basically because the legislature enacted a 5% gross production tax on those wells in the first 3 years of their operation, and now the fight out there in public is that going to be repealed by voters this fall, right? Are voters going to vote to get rid of that? These people are now being forced to go and fight on double defense, right? Because of what the legislature did. So anyhow, that is where that effort, the media still says 7% GPT, but the plus 5 GPT campaign, that is where all that has gone. That has basically hit the end of the road at this point. Okay. Even at this candidate forum last night, and in the wider world of politics and political campaigns, and on the Trent England Show, I never endorse anybody, I never tell anybody how to vote, but we are going to talk, obviously, about just some of the truths and fictions. We're going to try to anchor political debates, as we always do, in the facts and in the truth and in our principles. And whether it's legislative session or candidate campaigns, we're going to drive the conversation to the truth. And one of these myths that's floating around out there and reared its ugly head even just yesterday is this idea that tax cuts cause budget shortfalls. Look, if you're a regular viewer of the show or listener to the Trent England Show, you know that's not true. But let's just say it again, because this is going to be really important. It is going to be critical for us as conservative Oklahomans to be able to explain to people why that's not true, because we're going to hear it hundreds of times between now and November, right? So why is that not true? Government budgets are always based on predictions, right? Just like I base my family budget on how much money I think I'm going to make. Now, that's pretty stable. When I was a kid growing up, my dad was a small businessman. It wasn't nearly so stable. It was a lot more, in that sense, not in any other way, it was a lot more like government, right? Because Dad's income went up, it went down, it fluctuated all over the place. Some of it was sort of predictable, a lot of it was not predictable. Beyond 4 or 5 months, it was not very predictable, right? But still, if you're going to write a budget, what do you have to do? You have to make predictions. You have no choice. Government budgets in Oklahoma on a 1-year budget cycle. The fiscal year starts July 1st, runs through the end of the next June, right? So our fiscal year is a 1-year cycle. In government, if you have a balanced budget requirement, think of it this way, right? If you're going to have a requirement that the budget be balanced, well, how do you do that when you don't know how much money there's going to be? Well, the balanced budget requirement is really based on a prediction. Right? It has to be based on a prediction. And the prediction always includes whatever tax rates happen to be. This idea that, well, if tax rates were higher, we wouldn't have had a shortfall is the most lame brain thing for a person to say, because it exposes the fact that they don't understand the most basic fact about government writing a budget. The predictions are based on what tax rates actually are. Right? And frankly, I mean, look, this is not a conservative conspiracy theory to say lower tax rates tend to generate more economic growth, higher tax rates are a burden on economic growth, so they tend to produce less, right? If the price of milk goes up, people buy less milk. If the price of milk goes down, people buy more milk, right? Maybe not a lot. Maybe milk is not, super elastic, to throw in a little economic term there. But look, we know prices matter. That means taxes matter. That means lower taxes are actually a little bit more likely to cause budget surpluses. And higher taxes are a little bit more likely, liberals and conservatives can debate how much, higher taxes are more likely to produce budget shortfalls, because if you change tax rates, if you raise taxes, you're likely to actually get a little bit less than you predict. And if you lower taxes, you're likely to get a little bit more than you predict. Now, you're not going to make it all up. One thing that we are definitely going to expose, I'm going to pour heaping pots of boiling shame on this election cycle, is when you get conservative, I got to use the air quotes here, and I can do it because we're not just on radio anymore, conservative candidates who say, I'm going to cut taxes so that government will bring in more money, because I heard once about this Laffer curve thing at a dinner I partly paid attention at. No, the point of cutting taxes is not more money for government. I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunities to talk more about that at some future point. But when you cut taxes, you do tend to bring in a little bit more revenue than expected. And in some extreme cases, you may actually be able to cut a tax rate and bring in more revenue than you brought in before, because the tax was that burdensome, or it just changes that many people's decisions. And over time, as the economy grows, lower taxes, it has a compounding effect, right? The economic growth has a compounding effect, and eventually, if you lower taxes, you are going to wind up, and this is exactly what we've seen in Oklahoma with the income tax and other taxes. Curtis Shelton has written about this at ocpathink.org. You do see that they cut the income tax rate, it goes down a little bit, and then it bounces right back up, right? Why? Because it's good for economic growth. The economy's growing, and when the economy grows, we wind up with more money in government, and even more importantly, far more importantly, let's not make government the end-all, the be-all here. As conservatives, you wind up with more money for the people who actually earned it, right? That's what we really care about, isn't it? Okay. So let me just pop up Curtis's latest post, by the way, the March Economic Report. You can go and you can find it there. And what does it show? It shows that, first of all, the state is getting more revenue than it expected, not just more revenue than it had before, but more revenue than was anticipated. That means a budget surplus, right? So for all those people who are saying, well, the taxes are too low and it's causing shortfalls, we have a budget surplus right now. Because oil prices have gone up. I mean, that's basically the bottom line, the biggest driver there. But when you look at revenue growth, right, some of it is because of tax changes. Some of it is because the legislature has raised taxes over $1 billion over the last 3 years, but most of it is actually the result of economic growth. Okay. So does good policy matter? This is the last thing I want to hit on, because we got the candidates talking out there. We got people, sometimes they say, because I'll come along and I'll say, well, I can't believe this candidate or that candidate or this legislator. I can't believe that they're just throwing ideas out the window. They're not paying attention to what is actually good policy here. And people say, well, you can't really. I mean, it's not, good policy doesn't matter. Look, here's the bottom line for conservatives. Tax volatility. I know this starts sounding wonky, but it's not really wonky. We deal with this stuff in our daily lives all the time. Every business deals with this. Volatility is a killer, and especially for people who want limited government. Why is that? right? It's because if government revenues are on this herky-jerky path, they go up, they go down, they go up, they go down, what happens when they go up? When they go up, government spends more money. What happens when government spends more money? Government creates dependency. It creates expectancy. It creates jobs. It creates programs. It creates things like the health department did, right? You read you follow the health department scandal that kind of kicked up in the fall, and it's still going on, but it's sort of out of the headlines right now. Governor Fallon had all these great ideas. They had all these great ideas. Oh, we don't want people to smoke, so let's like have another program that tells people not to smoke. And we want people to be healthy, so let's go pave a sidewalk somewhere, right? I mean, all this stuff, it's well-intentioned, it's good intentions combined with utter foolishness, right? I mean, let's not gild the lily too much, right? I mean, it's good intentions and people who are just bad at what they do and totally incompetent. I mean, you look at some of these programs, some of the things that TSED does, and you say, I mean, look, I guess it's the fact that the more money some people have, right, it causes this suppression of their IQ or something. You ever notice that, right? I mean, how is it that, I mean, TSED, right, they start off spending money to try to cure cancer, and then they wind up spending money promoting underage gay bars for kids. Like, what? How do you do that, right? This is crazy. The production staff here thinks it's crazy, right? We all think it's crazy. So look, sorry, yeah, we got to hold it together here. We got to do this for the people. The problem with volatility is when government goes up, when revenues go up, government gets bigger. When revenues go down, does government get smaller? Maybe a little bit, right? I mean, but look, we basically held revenues constant in Oklahoma, and have you heard the wailing, the weeping, the gnashing of teeth, right? So the people up at the Capitol a couple of weeks ago, I mean, it is just to hold government spending basically flat, creates the end of the world, the apocalypse, right? In the minds of so many people, it is very hard to do that. It's very hard to keep government from growing. And so revenue volatility serves the interests of people who want big government. It's a ratchet, right? You've used a ratchet, I've used a ratchet, right? Spending goes up, government gets bigger. Revenue goes down, government doesn't get smaller, maybe it locks in place, right? But that ratchet doesn't go the other way. And then it bounces and revenue goes back up, and then all of a sudden government's getting bigger again. It's getting bigger all the time, right? This is why conservatives need good public policy. We should not, I mean, we may have to compromise here and there. Obviously, you got to compromise in the legislative process. But ultimately, conservatives should be driving Oklahoma toward tax policy that avoids volatility. Whether it's taking gross production taxes and putting them in a fund where they can't be spent in the first year when they come in. I really like that idea, right? Or whether it's just getting rid of the gross production tax altogether. I've personally suggested this to people. Get rid of it and replace it with other forms of taxation that are more stable. I mean, look, gross production tax is the worst. Income tax, not very good. Still a lot of volatility because people with higher incomes who pay more income tax, they have an easier time moving in and out of states, shifting where they actually earn their income, and they have opportunities to shift when they earn income. There's lots of games that people can play. You know this, I know this, right? Because that's the way the tax code works. Sales tax, a little bit more stable, still moves up and down with the economy, but sales tax is more stable, especially when you have a broad-based sales tax like we have here in Oklahoma. Property tax, very, very stable. And this is where I wind up arguing with some of my conservative friends who say, oh, property tax is horrible. Look, property taxes are as old as the Republic. You can go back and read the Federalist Papers where there's talk about property taxes even there, right? Property taxes have been around for a long time. And, look, income tax is bad, sales tax is bad, property tax is bad, GPT is bad. It's all bad. It's a cost. Right? We want to minimize that cost, and we want good public policy that minimizes some of the other negative effects of, in this case, we're talking about revenue volatility. Okay. One last thing, one last point on all of this, that I hope that, and this is something that some of the folks talking last night at this candidate forum, some of them hit on this, and others maybe not so much. But look, let's pull up this chart. This is from state government, their own chart of Oklahoma's economy. The most recent one of these I could find comes from the third quarter of last year, and this is Oklahoma's economy. And you can see in there, You've got trade, transportation, utilities, you've got financial activities, you've got mining, which that's oil and gas, mining 18%, you got government back there 14%, a bunch of other stuff. What does all this mean? I wanted to put this chart up there. We'll pop it up one more time here. In just a minute, or we can pop it up now. I wanted us to look at this chart and think about, there are pieces of this pie that create wealth, that make people better off directly. And there are pieces of this pie that don't do that directly. They can do that, but they don't necessarily do that, right? When you go out to a restaurant, you believe that the money that you spend is worth less to you, right, than the food that you buy and the experience of going out and having hopefully a nice dinner at a restaurant, right? If it doesn't turn out to be that way, you might have buyer's remorse, but you only did it because you felt like, you know, my 30 bucks or $5 or wherever you go, right? I'm assuming you're taking a family, right? We're not spending 30 bucks on just ourselves at a restaurant, right? But I don't want anybody to think I'm that kind of guy. But you know, my 30 bucks, my 40 bucks to take my wife out to dinner, right? That is worth less than the experience I get and then the food that we get and all that, right? And that actually creates wealth. I mean, I know this is economics 101, but it's so important as we head into the political cycle to remember this. Government doesn't do that. Government doesn't engage in that kind of transaction. Government is force. Right? And look, now this is not, I'm not saying that police officers are bad. I'm not saying that firefighters are bad. I'm not saying that school teachers are bad. I'm not saying that middle management in higher education are bad. A lot of them are, but I'm not saying that right now, right? The point is that when you look around this pie and you look at all these pieces of the economy, what you see are all these slices of pie, some of them big, some of them small, where people are engaging in voluntary transactions because they believe that they're getting better off. And when they do that, that inherently creates wealth. It actually makes people better off, right? Otherwise, people wouldn't voluntarily engage in those transactions. I need to go to work because my time is worth less to me than the money that I need to feed my family and, you know, put shoes on my kids and all that stuff, right? You go to work for the same reason, right? This is why we do these things. Government isn't that way, right? Which means that government is always risky. And this is, I get so frustrated because we have, can I say it, we have candidates again who claim to be conservatives, party labels notwithstanding, right? In Oklahoma, we have candidates who claim to be sort of conservative, free market people with you know, at least 3 different party labels this year. But then they talk like government is either just the same. This is why you can't just run government like a business, by the way. Can I say that? Am I allowed to say that? You can't just run government like a business. Some things in government should be run more like businesses run them, right? We should have a bottom line. We should do real budgeting, stuff like that. But government is not like anything else as we go around this pie, because government takes things by force, does things by force. And so we never know. Here's the point. There's a knowledge problem with government. We never know whether any particular government transaction is making anybody better off who's involved in that transaction, right? Because the politician is standing over here saying, I'm taking money from this person, I'm giving stuff to that person, but we don't know because neither of these people are acting voluntarily. We don't know whether anybody's better off. We know that the politician's better off, but the politician's not even a part of the primary transaction, right? That, the politician wants us to think, well, it's just, you know, this person's helping that person. And that's not really what's going on. At least not directly, right? This is the problem with government. This is why, ultimately, here's the point. We need to elect people who understand that about government. We need to elect people who actually get that government is different. Government needs more accountability. Government needs more skepticism. I always say when I mention skepticism, I don't want to be a cynic. Government doesn't need skepticism, but true citizens, right? Self-government means skepticism of government, because we know, right, that it's using force, it's taking by force, it's doing by force. That's what government does. Okay, so that is the end of that little rant for today. But look, I think this is important. You're probably around candidates. I'm around candidates. We've got to drive the political discussion to recognize some of these basic facts. Good policy actually matters, and government is different, and frankly, dangerous in a different way than than pretty much all of the rest of our economy out there. Okay, I have a new post up, switching gears here very quickly. I have a new post up on Senate Joint Resolution 70. Just put that up this morning at ocpathink.org. You can go there. You can get all the information, lots of links in there. I've been explaining to some folks on the Facebook page, and I tried to put this explanation in that post. These are not bond dollars, borrowed dollars. Sometimes people mix this up. It's really easy to do because there are two different questions that you have to ask when you're talking about these education funds. One is, what are they spent on? So you have operations dollars, you have building dollars, rough categories. The building dollars actually include a lot of other stuff. You basically operating expenses, capital expenses. I've wonked out enough that I can use those categories, right? So those are categories of things you're spending money on within education. Then you have a question, are you spending the money you bring in, or are you selling bonds and then using the money that comes in to pay those bonds off, right? Now, you can only do that for capital expenses. So you've got operations expenses, capital expenses. And then within capital expenses, you've got a question, do we just bring in money and use that money to put down new turf on the football field? Or do we bring in money because we sold bonds to put down new turf on the football field, and now we have to pay those bonds off? You can do it either way, and this is really important to understand, because when we talk about, I found that when we talk about Senate Joint Resolution 70, we talk about breaking down the funding silos and allowing money that right now the law says can only be spent on buildings and turf and stuff like that. When we talk about opening that silo up so that that money can also be spent if a local school district wants to, if the school board wants to, if the school board believes it has higher priorities than turf and it wants to spend that money on teachers or textbooks, right? When we talk about breaking down that silo, people say, well, I thought all this money was bond money. No. Some of that money goes to paying off bonds. Senate Joint Resolution 70 has nothing to do with that. Wouldn't change anything with that, right? I mean, bonds are still very limited. They still have to go to capital expenses. None of those laws would change. But if a school district is bringing in some money, doesn't have to use it to pay off bonds, right? That's a separate deal. If they're bringing in money, now they wouldn't say, well, the only thing we can do with this money is put down turf. They could say, or you could go to your school board and say, you know what, you could actually spend that money on some other things. You could spend that money on some higher priorities. All that's explained in the new blog post I've got up. Okay. Last thing for the Trent England Show, tomorrow on the program, Phil Gover will be with us. You may have read about him in the paper yesterday because the Oklahoman had this yesterday. The charter school that Phil Gover is trying to start here in Oklahoma City was denied by Oklahoma City Public Schools. We're going to talk with Phil about why that is. Of course, we've seen lots of school districts around the state, rather than embracing options, embracing diversity, they fight back against it. They have all kinds of reasons that they give for that. But look, competition at the end of the day, if you have two choices, you're going to go in business, and your business could either have a monopoly or not have a monopoly, and have competition. What would you choose? Well, some of us, I know you're sitting there thinking, well, I would rather be in competition because it would make me better. Well, really, yes, competition makes us better. Did I get you on that one? I know. That's what I would think. If somebody asked me that, right, well, I would rather be in a competitive marketplace. But look, at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to have a monopoly. And that's what we see from a lot of school districts. It's a lot easier for them to have a monopoly. It's a lot easier for parents to have fewer choices. We're going to talk with Phil. He's got this innovative idea for a charter school in Oklahoma City. And he's got an interesting history of working with education, working with Native Americans, and that's his background. We're going to talk to him about all of that tomorrow. I'm really excited. I hope you will join the Trent England Show tomorrow, this same time during the lunch hour. We'll be here talking with Phil. Don't forget to watch us, to like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Trent England Show. You can also follow on iTunes if you got an Apple device. We're on iTunes. The whole archive is at ocpathink.org. We're on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/Trent England, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube. We're all over the place on the Trent England Show. Find us, share us, and thanks for watching.